Hello and welcome. I'm Gillian Hubner, and I lead the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues at Georgetown University. I'm grateful to our colleagues at First Focus and the Child Partnership for co-hosting this conversation today. June 8th marks National Children's Day, so we consider this week Children's Week. It's an opportunity to honor children and young people as critical members of our families, our communities, and global society, while also acknowledging the unprecedented gravity of the challenges they currently face. Today's conversation will focus on the US government's commitment to children around the world. For many years, the US government has spent less than 1% of the federal budget annually on foreign assistance, and only a small fraction of this amount was appropriated with bipartisan support to meet the needs of children in difficult situations around the world. Yet even with this limited investment, impressive results were achieved. We've halved the number of preventable childhood deaths over 20 years. We reduced the number of children in hazardous work by half since 2000. We've supported meaningful efforts to protect children from online trafficking, and we've assisted tens of millions of people facing humanitarian disasters, half of whom are children. We've expanded access to education and increased girls' enrollment in school, and the list goes on and on. With its notable investments in international development, the technical expertise and research capabilities that were embedded within key US government agencies and departments, and diplomatic outreach, the US government has historically been an important partner in addressing children's vulnerability worldwide. This has been and should continue to be a source of American pride. The US Congress holds the power of the purse, shaping the national budget to reflect American values and priorities. And as our legislators consider critical decisions now on the fiscal year 2026 appropriations, our conversation partners today will reflect on the real-world consequences of their decisions on children across the globe. We will be sharing resources throughout this conversation in the chat box, and you can also find a link to the compilation of related sources on our event page. We'll also be tracking questions that come in through the Q&A and try to address those at the end of the conversation. But right now, I'd like to turn the conversation to Kathy Sacco, one of our co-hosts. She serves as the Vice President for International Children's Policy at First Focus on Children. Prior to First Focus, Kathy worked for nearly 8 years at the US Department of State Office of Children's Issues. Kathy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Gillian. And I just want to thank everyone for joining our conversation today for this very important conversation. I am going to focus on the devastating impact that the cuts have had. And, as Gillian so eloquently laid out, around the world, children are facing numerous challenges, including poverty, conflict, hunger, disease. And one of the signature products that we do here at First Focus on Children is our children's budget book, where we analyze the federal budget and what share of that goes towards children and young people. And so one of the areas that I focus on is on international children's policy and the federal budget that goes towards foreign assistance. So in our analysis of the foreign assistance funding, and as Gillian pointed out, that only 1% of the federal budget goes towards foreign assistance. So in our analysis, we found that the federal funding for global children and youth is spread out among 26 to 30 offices and bureaus across the federal government. And again, despite the public perception and the administration framing this as wasteful spending, to reiterate, foreign aid only makes up about 1% of the entire federal budget. And that is roughly about $60 billion that supports those international priorities. And in that, only 9 cents of every $1 of foreign assistance goes directly to programs that benefit children and youth. And that minuscule investment, of course, as Gillian had pointed out, aids children in promoting global stability, reduces migration pressures, and prevents the spread of disease and extremism. We see investing in children as a strategic investment in a safer, more prosperous world. So what's currently at stake? As we know, earlier this year, the Trump administration cut funding to USAID. He has proposed rescission cuts of $8.4 billion to foreign assistance. And these cuts would reverse the decades of bipartisan support and progress in child survival and development. In that $8.4 billion in rescissions, and what rescissions means is that it's pulling back money that has already been obligated towards programs and things, and so that they are wanting to pull that funding back. And that rescission disproportionately affects programs that benefit children. Those proposed cuts target global health programs like vaccines and maternal and child health, education and food security initiatives, humanitarian aid for children in conflict zones. The current administration has also put forth a budget proposal that slashes foreign affairs funding by 85%. That's the lowest in 8 decades. One of the things that I wanted to point out is one of the most damaging but lesser known effects or setbacks during this administration in the gutting of USAID was the gutting of USAID's Office of Children and Diversity. The office is mandated or was mandated through something called the Public Law 10995. The office helped to coordinate foreign assistance for children across the federal government. And it implemented the whole government and multi-sectoral U.S. strategy to advance care and protection for children around the world. And it also addressed early childhood development through the passed Global Child Thrive Act. It helped to fund early child development efforts, such as responsive parenting programs in Cambodia, children who are living in orphanages or outside of family care, and also children with disabilities, for example. So that office, again, was created to coordinate the U.S. efforts. So if you're talking about efforts to be transparent, better coordinated, et cetera, this is what this office was created to do, and it is now gone. So what does that mean? It's fewer resources, less oversight, and more children around the world that are falling through the cracks, whether that be into orphanages, trafficking rings, or in the cycle of poverty. And again, these cuts disproportionately impact children because it slashes funding for vaccines, education, nutrition, child protection systems, emergency aid. And yet, children are the least responsible for these global crises, and they will pay and are paying the highest price. I would say foreign assistance is strategic. Again, it's less than 1% of the entire US federal budget, but it saves millions of lives and builds goodwill around the world. So let me give you the numbers. The return on investment for children, that every dollar that is invested in child health and education yields high returns in economic and growth and stability for the United States. So for example, every $1 that is invested in nutrition yields up to $35 in economic returns. Every $1 that is invested in immunization returns $26. Every $1 that is invested to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria delivers $31 in health gains and economic returns. Every $1 that is invested in international education delivers as much as $15 in economic returns. And also, every dollar that is invested in high quality early childhood programs has been found to offer a 13% annual return. And so for those in the stock market, that's higher than the stock market returns. So again, these are smart, evidence-based investments that give lifelong payoffs. So with that, I just would say, in an increasingly interconnected world, helping children in other countries is a smart investment that also improves our reputation globally. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our other speakers to give some more specific examples and the programs and the good work that was done for children globally.
Thanks so much, Kathy. You said a number of things that really struck me. One is, of course, these are legislative mandates that didn't go away, right? Those mandates continue to exist. So there are laws that are now not being upheld because the staff who implemented them are gone, and the agencies that implemented them in some cases are also gone. I also wanted to note that as you know, your organization does this phenomenal job tracking the budgets and the legislative mandates, et cetera. So anybody who wants to look at that can go onto the resource page and see, and I see we've put it in the chat as well. But when USAID was functioning, for instance, and there was a Children in Adversity office, there were annual reports to Congress where the progress made under these mandates and with this budget was carefully documented and publicly available for everybody to see. And those are now missing, right? They've been taken down. And so that kind of historical accountability is harder to track now. So that's another challenge that we're reckoning with now. How do you tell this story when the information about what existed is gone? Okay, thank you. We'll move now on to lived experience. This is not just something that we talk about in Washington. This is the reality lived by young people in countries all over the world. And one of our speakers lived in a refugee camp growing up. She was born in Tanzania to parents from Burundi, Divine Irakoze. And she and her family later moved to a refugee camp in Malawi, where she lived for 15 years. And thanks to investments in her education, she is now actually studying at a university in the United States. So Divine, can you speak to us a little bit about your experience with foreign assistance from the United States growing up, how it impacted you? And also you're very involved in youth advocacy and you have very strong opinions based on your experience, but also your education and your policy work that can inform how we move forward. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gillian, and thank you so much for everybody who's here today and for having me as well. I'm so honored. I'll say I'm super, super honored to speak to you today, not just as a representative of Global Campaign for Education, actually, but as someone whose life has been fundamentally shaped by the foreign assistance and whose story illustrates both its transformative power and the urgent need for its protection. So like she said, I was born in Tanzania, but later my parents we moved to Malawi, in Dzaleka refugee camp in Malawi, where I lived for about 15 years before moving to the United States for my undergrad. So I'll say growing up in the refugee camp, things were tough, I'll tell you this. But luckily some of us survived them, and that's why I am here today. So I I personally remember back then when I was in school, when I was a child, our classrooms were very overcrowded. We had very few books and supplies, and a lot of our teachers were volunteers doing their best with the little they had to help us. I remember sitting on stones under the trees just to make sure I'm attending class. And that was like when I was very little. And we're still staying. We lived in Luwani refugee camp for a few years before relocating to Dzaleka. And I remember, sitting on stones under the tree, under the sun, just to make sure that I'm getting the education. But what kept me and many of us going was this shared belief and hope that education could open doors someday if we could just keep going. So that hope wouldn't have been possible without foreign assistance. Programs supported by international aid provided education, food, safety, and even counseling for children like me. So we had organizations like Jesuit Refugee Services, JRS, that made a huge difference. They gave me and many others the support we needed, not just to survive, but to dream of something more. And as a teenager, actually, I remember I had joined many advocacy programs just to make sure that we're raising voices for children because not everybody had had the opportunity to get in school. And as a teenager, one of the main things that I remember I did was able to start a small group called Dzaleka Youth in Action. I wanted to help other young people in the camp believe that their stories and their future mattered as well. That too was made possible because of the organizations that were there helping us to help us like realize our potential and provide the education with the small resources they had, of course. And today I would say that foreign aid didn't just help me back then, it's still helping me today. And I was recently selected as one of the 8 Global Campaign for Education youth advocate to receive training in education advocacy, persuasive communication, and problem solving. And after participating in different training sessions, we are going to gather in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill in July. That's next month, which I'm super excited for, to meet with the U.S. Senators and representatives to advocate for increased education funding, improved access to education, and increased foreign education funding. But I'll be honest with you today, as I'm talking to you today, that I am worried and very concerned because the truth is children like me still exist in every corner of the world, still waiting for the support that helped me reach this stage. And as Congress made decision about the fiscal year 2026 budget, the proposed cuts of foreign assistance would devastate the future of millions of children globally. So when foreign aid is cut, children lose more than classrooms. They lose a lifeline. In refugee camps and crisis zones, school closure becomes immediate. Teachers who depend on international salaries are forced to leave. And school meals, often only consistent source, that is, the food meals that is only like a consistent source of nutrition for many children are eliminated. And psychosocial support programs that help children process trauma from war, depressment, or abuse disappear altogether. And so we just think that beyond those immediate losses are also long-term consequences we cannot ignore. Today, over 260 million children and young people around the world are out of school. They're not able to get education. And more than 700 million adults cannot read or write. If we cut on support now, those numbers will only grow. And so will problems like poverty, instability, and even conflict. But when we invest in education, we see real change. Educated communities are more peaceful and more stable. People are more likely to participate in democracy and work together. Kathy just mentioned the numbers of how the education, or of how every dollar invested in education has like really very huge return in everything that we invest in. And I would also say the education return is huge. And that brings back at least 4 or 5 economic growth. And I've seen this myself. Educated refugees go on to start business, lead communities, and give back. They are not a burden. I would say they're actually a blessing because they're contributing much in these host countries and everything whenever they're given a chance and opportunity to. So here's what I would hope the Congress and others will hear today, and join in hands with many others to support. I would say protect and increase funding for international basic education, prioritize programs that reach refugees, displaced, and marginalized children, ensure funds reach grassroots organizations who know the local realities, and support a whole child approach, one that includes education, nutrition, health, and emotional well-being, especially in emergency context. Foreign aid made it possible for me to leave the refugee camp, which is why I'm here speaking to you today from the United States. Stand in policy spaces and raise voices for children still waiting to be seen, to be heard. But the next child like me would make it to this platform if we turn away now. Well, I would say that we do have to think about all the children that are not able to be heard and are struggling to survive, holding onto that hope and hoping that someone hears them and come through for them and support and actually not be able to turn now. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much for all the caring about children everywhere and the support that everyone is putting in.
Thank you so much, Divine. Thank you for being with us. And I'm struck by, Kathy was earlier talking about return on investment for some of these programs. And when you look at you and hear your story, how do you even quantify that? I mean, the amount of capacity that you have and the amount of, wisdom and that you're bringing to your community, but also to your university in the United States and to us on this platform, and even to those working on Capitol Hill. Thank you for giving back all of that to us. It's invaluable. We're going to turn the conversation now to more frontline perspectives and the reality of experienced by program implementers. And I just want to flag that many of the people participating in the conversation moving forward have been directly affected. Some of them have lost their jobs or have had to change jobs, forced out of jobs that they loved. So as we listen to them, they won't necessarily talk about that, but keep in mind the personal toll that they've also experienced in these recent months. So I'm going to turn to Ilana Banin, who is she has 15 years of experience working across development and humanitarian and peace building initiatives. She's worked with the International Rescue Committee, with UNICEF, with PATH, and other organizations. So Ilana, can you speak about how the current situation is affecting those organizations and the children whom they serve? Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. So, yeah, I mean, the question we're grappling with today isn't whether foreign assistance for children is important. It's more whether it's strategically essential, if it works, and how the United States should invest in it. At the International Rescue Committee, where I've spent the last 5 years, and I should note, my personal role remains in flux due to the uncertainty of the budget, we've seen the dismantling of U.S. foreign assistance play out in real time. This year alone, we've had to halt services for over 2 million people. Most of them are women and children. And the headlines, they talk about budget ceilings. But what we're seeing on the ground are children being pushed out of schools, clinics, and safe spaces. Let me offer 2 powerful examples. In South Sudan, U.S. assistance through IRC supported over 370,000 refugees. That's not just food and water, it's child protection, it's education, and it's support for adolescent girls, just exactly as Divine was just alluding to. That included programs to prevent early marriage and keep girls in school. And when that funding was frozen, those programs, they stopped overnight. One of our team members recently relayed that we were halfway through a curriculum on life skills, and by the next week, half those girls were engaged or they were completely out of reach. Think about that, right? That short amount of time span, what it took to move the needle. This is what cuts look like in real practice. It's not just fewer services. It's the reversal of fundamental progress. It's a 13-year-old being forced into marriage, not because she wants to be, but because her options have completely disappeared. In Afghanistan, U.S. foreign assistance was a lifeline for over 23 million people. The IRC's U.S.-funded outpatient therapeutic program and targeted supplementary feeding program was treating more than 45,000 people for malnutrition, including close to 16,000 children under the age of 5. Those are tiny, small babies who are starving. Since that funding was terminated, these children now go without food and without care. And as our senior advisor for nutrition, Dr. Khan, told us, children in our stabilization units, they're too weak to cry. Like, think about your kids at home. Imagine them not having enough tears left because they're too weak, right? Like, that just is mind-blowing to me. So I think we need to think about what are the consequences of if those cuts are enacted. And the risk isn't just loss. It's the deeper collapse of the infrastructure that protects child's health, education, and safety. And along with it, the U.S. credibility that we've spent decades building in fragile regions. So in Sudan, one of the worst conflicts of our generation, causing millions to flee worldwide, a 12-year-old boy recently relayed, "My biggest hope for the future is to help rebuild my country. I dream of becoming an engineer where I can contribute to safe spaces and strong buildings for my community. I want to be part of a generation that brings lasting peace and prosperity." So we've heard critiques that USAID-backed programs are disconnected from U.S. interests. But to me, and to most of us, I think here, those claims don't stand up to scrutiny. The administration's decisions didn't eliminate inefficiency. It just shut down the entirety of USAID's mandate. That's not reform, it's retreat. So I want to be clear that I believe that foreign assistance must evolve. The systems that we're working with, they were never designed for this era of cascading climate shocks, pandemics, global instability. It's underfunded and overstretched. But you can't rebuild something if you've completely dismantled it. As Secretary Rubio said before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee just in May, the best kind of foreign assistance is not the kind that ends not because we've abandoned it, but because it worked. And I agree, but that's not what's happening. We're closing programs not because they've succeeded. We're pulling the plug midstream and asking vulnerable communities to survive the fallout. And when we do that, the consequences ripple outward as children are left behind, trust is eroded, and America's strategic position is weakened. And when U.S. support vanishes, the world doesn't stop. Health threats continue to spread. Extremist groups, they fill vacuums. And authoritarian regimes, they step in. And it's not with education, and it's not with nutrition, but with surveillance and coercion. And we've seen it in the Horn of Africa, we've seen it in South Asia, we've seen it in the Middle East, time and time again. Foreign assistance is not a handout. It is a cornerstone of U.S. strategy, and it prevents migration, it fosters stability, and projects American values, exactly as Kathy said in her speech. This is where it matters most. Thanks.
Thanks, Alana. I always appreciate your passion and your very strategic mind and dedicated work over so many years. We're going to turn the conversation now to two people who've really led on the orphans and vulnerable children programming within the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is one of the largest pieces of American foreign assistance for vulnerable children, and really sort of built an architecture for multi-dimensional services for vulnerable children. Lauren has over 2 decades of experience designing and managing global health and social protection programs that center the needs of children and families. And she worked on PEPFAR across 5 administrations. Most recently, she served as the Senior Technical Advisor for Orphans and Vulnerable Children at USAID. And Gretchen Bachman had been with PEPFAR since the inception of the program in 2003. And she served as both an implementing partner as an advisor, and she was the senior advisor for orphans and vulnerable children in the State Department Bureau for Global Health. So I'll ask both of you to reflect on what this means for that program that you helped to build and implement. So Lauren, from your perspective and experience, what's one powerful example that illustrates the direct impact of foreign assistance on children's lives in the work that you've done?
Thank you. Thank you, Gillian, and thanks to everyone for participating today. I've spent much of my career working at the intersection of health and social services across sub-Saharan Africa. And I can say one of the clearest examples of the life-saving and life-changing impact of U.S. foreign assistance is the Orphans and Vulnerable Children programming under the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, that Gretchen and I have both worked on. This program has reached millions of children, and it's not only connecting children living with HIV to their medication, but it's also ensuring they have nutritious food, a stable caregiver, that they're accessing psychosocial support that they need, and safe access to education. And these programs have been a game changer, not only per PEPFAR, but also for communities, transforming communities and national systems that support children. Unfortunately, because of the stop work order, the OVC programs have been stopped. And while we've seen some aid programs coming back online, the OVC programs were not given a waiver by Secretary Rubio because they were not considered to be life-saving humanitarian assistance. So these programs have been terminated, staff have been let go, activities have been halted, and this has left millions of children without access to health and social services. And I just want to give a couple of real-world examples. So you may have seen some reporting from the New York Times. Nicholas Kristof talked about a 5-year-old boy, Evan Ansu, from South Sudan. He was born with HIV. He and his mother, Jennifer, were kept alive with ART medications provided by PEPFAR. However, because of the stop work order, they could no longer access their medication in South Sudan. Jennifer, his mom, died of an opportunistic infection, and just 1 week later, Evan passed away as well. The daily cost of Evan's medication is 12 cents. We've been receiving urgent WhatsApp messages from our partners. I'll give an example of a trusted partner in Southern Africa. They had to lay off most of their staff once US funding was cut in February of 2025. They went from 79 people to just 15 people, most of whom were working without pay. The HIV sensitive case management for children and families was stopped. The empowerment groups for adolescent girls were stopped, and caregivers have started missing clinic appointments. And we just received a report confirming what we feared, which is that people are dying. They have lost 26 people, 17 of whom were children, since the program was cut in February of 2025. And I just want to be very transparent here that these numbers we have that Gretchen will talk about in a moment as well are not certain. So folks like me who would normally be collecting and verifying and reporting this data, we've been terminated, laid off, some people working without funding to continue their roles. Communications with our partners have been sporadic. They're trying to pay outstanding bills and figure out how they're going to do their closing costs. And we have really lost the capacity to track the harm in real time. And just want to let everyone know this is not a warning. This is already happening, and this will only grow in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. Yeah. It's stunning when you hear a briefing in Congress that no one has died. And then you think, how have you checked that statement? Because those of you who are close to the programs know the truth. Gretchen, what are the most urgent risks or consequences that you foresee for children if these proposed cuts are enacted in fiscal year 2026?
Thanks, Gillian, and thanks, Lauren. I mean, as Lauren pointed out, it's future funding. It's trying to claw back funding that was already appropriated. So children are dying now, adults are dying now. We don't, there hasn't been a great transparency as there has in the past about data. So, and we don't have the people there, so it's very hard to actually get numbers. But what we've been looking at are models. So, for example, one of the mathematicians from Boston University came up with a model. It's available online. I think it's impactcounter.com, so anyone can look it up. But basically, what they look at is combined from this disruption, this very abrupt disruption in aid, particularly for global health programs. The number of children they predicted have died thus far is around 6,000. The number of adult deaths would be around 60,000. And the huge tragedy of this is these are from preventable causes. It's, children dying from diarrhea when there isn't clean water. It's, diseases like malaria. It's infectious diseases like TB that, we've had in certain countries control over those epidemics, and we are going to start backsliding on that. So I think the consequences, obviously, of death and illness are huge. And when we talk about children, we also have to talk about adult deaths. Adult deaths from the earlier part of the HIV pandemic rose to such a high point that we had literally, I think we had at the highest point over 14 million children who had lost one or both parents just because of HIV. That doesn't count wars, other diseases, and all the reasons that we use parents. And I think at that time we looked at it and we saw it not only as a humanitarian nightmare, but it's a security risk. When you lose that many parents that quickly, you have a lot of children who have potentially unstable situations, and you have society, really kind of a breakdown of family and as a result of secure situations. So we've got backsliding on things that affect us as Americans, backsliding on epidemic control, potential security concerns. And then we have just way too many deaths that were with planning, with our less than 1% of our budget, which is less than, honestly, what Ireland and other countries contribute to foreign aid. We've seen it's just devastating. I want to say that one of the other things that was recently modeled, and I think this is very important, and especially from where I come from the PEPFAR world and that experience, is there was a group led by University of Oxford that released a modeling article in the Lancet about a month ago, and they predicted what the impact will be over the next 5 years if these cuts continue. And one of the things that they predicted was that roughly there would be almost 3 million more children orphaned around the world, which is just, it's morally unacceptable. It's just, it's beyond comprehension. I want to just go back for a minute, Gillian, to something that Lauren was talking about within our home base, which is PEPFAR. And obviously this problem is much bigger than PEPFAR. But within PEPFAR, there had always been a 10% set aside for orphans and vulnerable children. That hasn't per se exactly ended, but it has changed in two ways. One, more than half the funding was just gutted. And secondly, the context of the program and the interventions that could be provided with that money really changed. And I think it's so important in terms of efficiency and sustainability to understand what that meant. For one, the kind of services that the OVC program used to provide, and I think have been cut back a great deal, really ensured that children, particularly those in rural areas who were orphaned, who had harder times getting to the clinic, that they got there, right? It was the case management, social services. But the other thing that the Orphans and Vulnerable Children program focused on was really the economic stability of families. What can we do with this family that's been affected by HIV to make them more financially stable so that, one, the drugs work, right? They're eating, they have a place to live, but also so that they become more self-reliant. And I think with the OVC earmark, we were able to do that more with children, with families, and with communities. And to just sort of pull the rug out under that, I think has been, it's just been awful. And it's been awful, as Lauren mentioned, to just hear about increasing numbers of children being hospitalized with opportunistic infections, parents dying, children dying, and just a complete sort of backsliding in everything that has been put together to make these communities and countries more resilient and better able to deal with this epidemic. So I will stop there, but I just think collectively it's pretty devastating what is happening and the implications, not only overseas, which are horrible, but the implications for our own security, both from disease and from conflict. I think we've, for the the dollars that Kathy was talking about, I think we've shot ourselves in the foot. And I hope Congress changes it. So that's all I'll say. But I really hope that they do not vote for the rescission. And I hope that they restore PEPFAR to its full amount, as well as other humanitarian aid for children.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And just commend you both for how much, well, for all of you, for how much time and energy you're putting in, even though your jobs are gone. These people are really committed. It's more than a job. I want to turn now to Leila Malani, who's the Program Director for Global Policy and Advocacy at Futures Without Violence, where she leads international efforts to prevent violence against women and children, which are correlated. She contributes quite a bit to a number of coalitions, including the Child Partnership and the Coalition for Adolescent Girls and Violence Against Children Task Force, and the Coalition to End Violence Against Women and Girls globally. Thank you, Leila. Bring us back to policy implications and the strategic way forward.
Thank you so much, Leanne. And thank you for the incredible presentation by the panelists. I'm in awe and I'm humbled by the level of commitment. And truly, I think it's highly noted that there are folks on this call who are not here for just their job. It's out of their expertise, but also their passion for this important work. So I want to continue this conversation, and what I'll highlight you'll hear some of the items that we've already addressed, but if we can show the presentation. As we continue the conversation, I want to build on the urgency and moral clarity you've already lifted up and bring in the strategic dimension that frames our collective advocacy efforts for the FY26 and beyond appropriations process. This is not business as usual. We can't rely on our previous efforts and the way we've done things. The moment demands something more. We need to be smarter, more responsive, and more united in our approach to foreign assistance that protects children while also addressing some of the legitimate calls for reform and accountability. Slide 2, please. Thank you. So the way we've done this work is by framing our advocacy around 3 key pillars. We note that foreign assistance is not charity. What it is it's actually addresses our national security, it's an economic strategy, and it's global leadership. Security, for one, is the way our programs that prevent child trafficking, support education, and reduce violence help prevent instability before it reaches our borders. One example is how education alone cuts conflict risk by 50%. These are the types of narratives we must lift up. We're not just strategically pulling these information. We've always messaged around these approaches. However, we really need to hone in on these key lines. The second point about foreign assistance is that it's economics. Half of U.S. exports go to low and middle income countries. In low and middle income countries, the return on investment from immunization alone is an estimated $52 per dollar invested. These savings represent the social and economic benefits avoided due to vaccination. This is return on investment, not just goodwill. And finally, our leadership. As authoritarian influence expands our global presence, especially in programs that protect children and families, become a powerful counterweight. We help shape the future of democratic values, and we cannot leave that void to others to take. Second slide. So what did our coalition of partners advocate for? We didn't change our message, we didn't change our request, but we honed in on what were some of the more powerful and impactful investments in children globally. What we're advocating for in FY26 is this. We're not asking for unchecked increases, we're asking for smart investments with proven returns. I'll highlight just a few that we have advocated for. For instance, the vulnerable children account that we've spoken of extensively. We've advocated for 31.5 million, and this is a lifeline for kids exposed to violence and exploitation. We've called for the same amount of money we've asked for in the most recent years, the 12.5 million for child protection compacts. These efforts are anti-trafficking programs that work hand in hand with local governments to dismantle trafficking networks. We've called for $30.17 million to fight child labor and build fair, safe economies. And finally, within our Homeland Security Cybercrime Center, we've asked for funding, actually an increased amount as opposed to the other accounts, including support for hero training programs, which identifies child victims of online exploitation. This amount reflects the increasing vulnerabilities of children to online sexual exploitation and abuse. These aren't vague aspirations, they're targeted tools with measurable results. And these reflect the cross-sector coalition of child advocates, national security experts, faith communities, and business leaders. This is how we've come together to message the critical funds that are important and life-saving. Next. Finally, we hear the criticisms. We have to be here to listen and respond accordingly. We hear the criticisms and we agree reform is needed. But as Lauren put it, we can't rebuild if we completely have dismantled the systems in place. We already have become leading through some of these programs that have ingrained in them checks and balances, evaluations. One example is the Violence Against Children surveys. These surveys have created unprecedented data on where violence happens and how it can help us design programs that will stop it. The C3, which is the under the cyber crimes effort, has delivered evidence-based interventions. And finally, these programs don't just feel good, they show results. We got to tap into the data and the results that have saved lives and improved the pathways to children not just surviving, but thriving. That's why we embrace smart modernization, not as a threat, but as a mandate. And we want to focus on, and in our efforts to do advocacy, on streamlining the delivery, investing in local partnerships, and eliminating duplication and inefficiencies. These are the messages we want to carry to Congress and identify the champions that will work with us to carry this mantle forward. In this climate, we can't afford to choose between reform and impact. We must deliver both. And finally, now more than ever, the next slide, please. More than ever, America must lead. We must be smarter, stronger, and more united. And we do so by building bridges between security and compassion, between bipartisan values and common sense strategy, between moral imperatives and measurable outcomes. Foreign assistance, especially when it protects children, is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's a force multiplier. And yes, it's a reflection of who we are as a nation. We really need to hone in on that message and identify with the champions that we have so that they can help us carry this message forward. So let us move forward, not defensively, but strategically and united, not with fear, but with focus, and not in business as usual, but in a way that truly listens to criticism, lives with and builds on evidence, and most importantly, to the needs of the world's most vulnerable, it responds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila. Just to note that many of her talking points sync with letters that have been shared with members of Congress pulled together by a consortium of partners, the Child Partnership. So if you would like to see those requests to Congress, we can make those available to you. And I also just really want to thank you for this acknowledgement that even those who are working within the system acknowledge the need for reform, and we're pressing for it themselves in many ways. And they're still eager to have that conversation. And as far as I'm aware, there has been no concerted effort to tap into those who are implementing the programs to comment on that reform process, what things could be. And I'll just say that we're quite happy to host that conversation at Georgetown if any members of Congress would like to have it. Okay, so moving forward then, how do we meet this moment? Recognizing the criticisms, recognizing the need for reform. How do we move forward? Ilana, let's start with you.
Great, thanks. And just thanks to Leila. I'm going to echo a lot of what you just said. I think first and foremost, we start by telling the truth that real lives, that includes moms, babies, youth, they're all at stake. And we don't have the luxury of waiting. That has to be addressed now in the FY26 budget. So starting there. But we also look forward to an approach that's more adaptive, founded in principles that enable market growth, cost effectiveness, that spread American values while still remaining firmly committed to the children who depend on us to reemerge from dire circumstances. So how do we do that? We should prioritize a system that moves from fragmented, donor-dependent projects to scalable, resilient infrastructure. In refugee hosting regions, we often promise education, but then when schools go dark when there's no power. We fund health, but if clinics can't refrigerate the vaccines, they go to waste. Or we train youth, but then the laws in the context that they're operating in or living in stop them from working. So we need to step back from playing whack-a-mole. We need to draw in private capital. We need to think about how to leverage American innovation and then use that to facilitate the seeding of local growth. We want a system that treats vulnerable and displaced people as builders of their own future. And I think we align that assistance with today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities. Thanks.
Thanks. Lauren.
Thanks, Gillian. I think for me, I just want to underscore the fact that we need to have child-focused programming. You know, children are not just mini adults. They have unique needs. You know, for HIV, they acquire HIV differently, often perinatally. They experience stigma differently. They require tailored treatment, adherence support, and psychosocial support. I have colleagues across global health that work, you know, on tuberculosis. It's really hard to diagnose kids, and they've been working on innovations to make that easier. My colleagues who work on neglected tropical diseases, who are looking at stunting and blindness, leveraging billions of dollars from pharma. You know, these things are really important, and I would hope that we can set aside this funding and also the experts in these fields, if we can empower them to participate in this conversation and figure out how this goes forward. And we want to just give our partner countries a runway to finalize sustainability plans and implement these plans. We had plans you know, over the next 5 years to significantly reduce our funding. And so with this abrupt nature of the cuts, that has really hurt us. And I just want to end with a quote. When I was working in South Africa, I had a quote on my desk from Nelson Mandela. And it said, "There is no revelation of a society's soul than the way it treats its children." I think that's very appropriate for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Back to Kathy Sacco, co-host.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Gillian. I don't even know how to follow, but I want to reiterate, I think Lauren pointed out the unique needs of children that happen. They are not many adults, and they have unique needs, and the programs need to reflect that. I think our policy needs to reflect that. So this is what I would say. Again, children are often left off the table because they don't vote. They don't have super PACs. So we have to raise our voices on behalf of them. So I would ask any members of Congress to really think about the impacts of these cuts on children around the world, to save those, to not cut, to save that funding, to increase that funding for their needs. For any members of the public, please, please call your members of Congress, call your senators, call your representatives, and tell them, vote no on the rescission, vote no on these cuts, and protect children's lives and protect USAID. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Divine, I think we should give you the last word as someone closest to the challenges and therefore also closest to the solutions.
Thank you so much, Gillian. So I would simply say that we need to protect and increase foreign assistance, especially for education, health, and child protection programs in vulnerable communities. These investment, just like just forget her name, but the last speaker, she said these are not charity, and that these investments are not charity. And I'd also add that they actually are true, not charity, but they are hope, stability, and opportunity for millions of children. And I would also say that we must listen to people that are most affected, especially young people with lived experience. And I truly do appreciate you having me today because when we include young voices in policy and program design, we create solutions that actually work for people they are meant to help. And last one, I would say that support local and grassroots organizations. They're already doing the work. They understand the community needs deeply, And with the right resources, they can reach children faster and more effectively. And actually, the last one I would say, I'd finally say stay engaged, advocate, raise your voices, and yeah, reach out to as many people as you can, like lawmakers, support organizations that serve vulnerable children, because every action counts. And children in refugee camps, conflict zones, in poor communities don't need, I would say they don't need pity. They actually need partners, and together we can beat that. We can be that hope for these children and the future that they're looking forward to. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Divine. That was a great note to end on, and I agree with you about the focus on youth as partners, right? Young people as partners. And these kids are much more than vulnerable. They're full of opportunity and potential. We're going to continue these conversations. The Collaborative on Global Children's Issues at Georgetown will be co-hosting with Kuja another conversation on June 12th, led by young people, about the impacts of foreign assistance on young people. They'll be leading the conversation, and we'll be continuing the conversation throughout the summer and into the coming year as well, and doing our best to preserve many of the lessons that have been learned in the past years about investing in children in developing countries. Thank you all so much. We'll share the recording to all who RSVP'd, and it will also be posted on the First Focus website and the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues website. If you can't find it, feel free to reach out and we'll make sure it gets to you. Thank you all. May our good work continue.